Welcome to Craftlit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 546, and we're back! This episode of Craftlit is brought to you by you. Thank you. Well, hello. It has been a little while. I hope your holidays were all wonderful, if distant, and not too weird because of that. Hello, Globe. And I hope that your new year is shaping up to be a good one. And I very much hope that the book we're about to embark upon fits that bill as well. I think it will keep you happy. I hope it will keep you giggling. It is not the book that I thought I was going to do, but it is the one that listeners on our Zoom chats convinced me would probably be better. Speaking of Zoom chats, hey, we're still doing 5 a.m. Eastern Time Tuesday Zoom chat for those of you for whom that time mark is more conducive, and 7 p.m. Thursday nights, again, Eastern Time, for almost entirely people in the States. We don't get people from other countries very often. Tracy Tompkins, fabulous babe that she is, has been helping me out so much with Zooms because those times are harder now that I have a job, especially the Thursday nights. So huge apologies to the Thursday night crowd. It's a story, but either way, links to register for these two Zoom chats will be in the show notes of this episode. Here's how it works. You click on that, you register. To your email is sent a link. Even if you suddenly get a ping saying that link has ended, it ends after 20 sessions, it continues to work. So it officially ends, but it doesn't die. So we've been using the same link since 9 months ago. So that should make that a little bit easier. It's always the same link. You can just stick it in your calendar and click in. Not surprisingly, Craftlit people being Craftlit people, lovely, lovely groups of people show up from New Zealand and Finland and Sweden and England, and we've had Denmark, we've had Germany and Australia. It's just been lovely to get a chance to see other people who listen and talk to other people who listen and who love books and who are reading really interesting things. And, talking to other human people these days is a real treat. So please join us if you can. It is a good time. And you learn about a lot of cool new books that people are reading because, everybody finds different stuff different ways. So lots of fun. But before we get too far into the episode, I wanted to catch you up on some voicemails that came in towards the end of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. First, we're going to hear from Anita, who has some good information for all of us sitting around at home, still working or otherwise. Then we hear from Melissa Weaver Dunning with a really interesting tip for something to go watch on YouTube. Then season's greetings from Tara Worster. Tara, thank you so much. You are just adorable, and it's good to hear your voice again. Jenna Lee has some lovely commentary, I think, on Tenant of Wildfell Hall, followed by Lise, who also has some Tenant of Wildfell Hall comments and a recommendation for a future book, upon which I have news. So we're going to just listen to everybody right in a row, and then I'll fill you in. Here we go.
Hi, Heather. It's Anita, also known as Well Knit Life. I know that you're done with the Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and this message may not get aired, and that's fine. I just have noticed that when I've tried to email, I don't normally get a response, so I think maybe I might have the wrong email address. So just a couple things. First of all is that way back when, months and months ago, you made a passing comment on the need to make aprons because leggings don't have pockets, and I just wanted to let you know that there are some companies out there that do make leggings that do have pockets, and they're great, and I love to use them. because it certainly does make things easier when you have real usable pockets, and especially the ones that I've been using from a company called PopFit. They have lots and lots of pockets, so quite utilitarian, and they actually stay up even when I load those pockets up. Anyway, the second thing is that I think you're a little down on Gilbert at the end of the book as being not so exciting and not so dashing and romantic. And I think there's a little bit of a play to that dashing romantic thing where he rushes off to the wedding and he's going to crash into the wedding hall, into the church, and declare his love and try and stop the proceedings. And then it's like, but wait, there's reality. Reality is you look a mess because you've been dashing across the countryside trying to get there. And yeah. And I think that's kind of the thing is that this is romantic notion meets reality, which I think is kind of beautiful. And I do like, I don't know, I do think that after all of the drama and craziness, I would also probably want someone who's just into me and is perfectly happy and content hanging out. And that is not settling. I think that's quite nice and quite beautiful. Helen seems to be someone who wants peace and quiet, and when her husband was off in London, she wasn't saying, gosh, I wish I were there to enjoy the excitement. She was saying, what I'm trying to think of a non swear word way to say this, but what are you doing? Just come back here and hang out with us. So to find someone who actually likes that life and is so into you and respects you and is willing to reform for you, though she doesn't know about the incident with with her brother, but is willing to become a better person for you. I mean, that's I would imagine that's everything she would want. So anyway, hope you're doing well and love the show and ready for whatever's next. I really love this book. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Hi, Heather. It's Melissa Weaver-Dunning from Virginia. I am still catching up on The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and I just started listening to episode 544, and you're talking about the troubles in Ireland and this amazing trip that I wish I could go on. And I just wanted to let you know, in case you didn't know this, that I know an awful lot about Irish music, particularly the song tradition, having studied with a really amazing singer from Dublin many years ago, mid-90s, I guess. And that's the tradition that I've been steeped in, is England, Ireland, Scotland, traditional unaccompanied singing. But anyway, you were talking about the troubles and music, and there's a song that you need to go look up on YouTube and listen to, and it's by a musician named Tommy Sands, and the song is called There Were Roses. And his version is as good as anybody else's. Don't listen to Cara Dillon's. Well, you can if you want to, but I think she's insipid. Just go listen to that song because it sums things up so neatly, and you'll enjoy it for all the, that it's sad and tragic. But anyway, I just had to share that. And so, okay, talk to you later.
Hello, Heather. It is Tara Worcester. Worcester, wait, everywhere. I've got a mouthful of lunch. I just finished episode 523. And thank you to the lady who complimented me on my speaking abilities. Your name has literally just flown out of my mind, and I am so sorry. I was calling today to give an image to the Craftlit audience. There are many of us. We are amazing. On the menorah, there is a ninth candle. It is known as the shamash. It is the candle used to light all candles on the night of Hanukkah, the nights of Hanukkah. Pardon me. Erica from Craftlit Administration posted on her feed on Facebook about what the shamash was, and that to yourself be a shamash. Be that which ignites others in their pursuits. You, Heather, you are our shamash. You are the shamash of our community, and I wanted to send a joyous and wholehearted thank you to you for being all that you are so that we, the community, can blossom around you and ignite our passions in the ways we do. So thank you, Heather. You are the shamash of the lovely menorah of our community, and without you, we would not be what we are. Joyous Hanukkah, Heather, and to all those of the tribe, happy holidays to the rest of us, and Festivus to the best of us. I hope you're having a great day. I'm going to get back to the book. Mwah. Bye.
Hi, Heather. This is Janalee, Knits and Hikes on Ravelry. I had a couple of comments. I just finished listening to the 34 through 37 chapters, I think they were, and I had a couple of comments about that. First of all, regarding seatbelts, I had to laugh because I remember when my mom and dad got a car that had seatbelts for every single seat in the vehicle. I wasn't very old, but up to that point, the primary car that we had driven around in was the Chevy Nova that my mom had purchased when she started teaching at the as an actual teacher at the high school, and she bought it for herself, and it did not have seatbelts, and so we would just sit wherever we wanted to. But the other funny story I have regarding that is that when my husband and his family moved from Salt Lake to Reno, the vehicle that they drove out there had no seatbelts. And my husband was maybe 5 years old and did not want to miss any of the trip. So he spent the entire trip, which is about 10 hours, standing up in the car because there were no seatbelts. So we can't do that anymore, obviously. And I'm grateful, but I just thought that was a funny, experience that he had doing that. Moving on to the book, I thought it was really interesting to see what Helen sees as the pure expression of love versus what her husband sees versus is the pure expression of love, and compare that with, say, Mr. Hargrave's expression of love, because Mr. Huntington, Arthur, is very much my feelings make it worthwhile. Like, if I feel this way, then I have to act on it, and I have to, I'm in love, and she's not my wife, and she's married to someone else who happens to be my friend, but I don't care because my love is more important, right? It's a very, very selfish and self-centered. And I think Mr. Hargrave is quite a bit the same with his love in the monologue that he kind of gives to Helen at the very end of chapter 37. I think it's 37. He's talking about the pain and the anguish that they're suffering, and that he's suffering because of this love that he feels for her. And he tells her, you were the cause of it. Like, it's her fault he's suffering because he loves her so much and she won't let him express that. It's very selfish. And both he and Huntington, it feels like, I guess their belief is that their feelings excuse any bad behavior. Oh, you can't get mad at me because I'm in love. And love is the best excuse. Love is the only reason. And I see so many people that do this. And Helen, on the other hand, is saying, your behavior is a choice. Your feelings should not control your behavior. You're an adult. You get to decide. And even if you feel like not doing something, like, say, not getting up and going to work, you still do it because you're an adult. Or even if you feel like you're in love with this person who's unobtainable for some reason, you don't act on those feelings because that's not the way a grown-up behaves. I find it really interesting to contrast those two. And then the last thing that I liked was the quote a little bit earlier in that same chapter, when he says, don't you want revenge? And she says it would make him no better and me no happier. I think holding a grudge and being angry about someone else's behavior and wanting to get back at them are all very understandable emotions. But I agree with Helen. I don't think that revenge makes the person that you're getting revenge on any better, and it doesn't make you any happier. And focusing on that and focusing on the need for revenge very often makes you angry and bitter and sad. And I don't think that that's the way that we should live. That's not the way that I would want to live. I think we're happier when we just say, well, that was bad behavior and, I can't control your bad behavior. And so I'm going to focus on what I can control, which is my own behavior. But yeah, again, thank you so much for the work that you do, for the books that you provide for us to read and listen to along with you. I really appreciate that. And it is really making a big difference in my personal happiness to have this right now. So thank you.
Hi, Heather. This is Lise, Lynette from Ravelry. I just listened to the end of the Tenant of Wildfeld Hall, and it ended on an up note, which was wonderful. But I wanted to suggest a future book, not the next book. This can't be too close in time because there's some similar themes, and it's not the mystery that you were saying you wanted to do next. But please, 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 at some point, do Middlemarch. I was listening to an audiobook of that at the same time as I was listening to this, and the parallels are interesting and the differences are interesting. And I really think that the comparison and contrast would probably intrigue a lot of your listeners as well. So put that in the queue. It's a lot of fun. And this was a lot of fun, and thank you so much for doing it.
So first, Melissa, I totally want to talk to you more about Irish music, but I want to do it when Thing 2 can be here with me as well. So I'll talk to you about that later. As for what Lise said about Middlemarch, funny you should mention Middlemarch, Missy, because we've already been talking about it. As you might know, Middlemarch is a doorstop. It is like OED big. It's Harry Potter, the last book big. It is also a far more subtle kind of fun than the book we're about to embark upon, Northanger Abbey. It's gonna happen. It'll depend somewhat upon our readers' fortitude. Because, I don't know, Maya, how long have we been talking about it? 2 years now? It's been at least 2 years. And I've been working on it in the background. She's been working on it in the background. It will happen. I can't guarantee it's going to happen next. And it definitely wasn't going to happen now. However, it's coming. It really will be here. If you have a comment or question for Craftlit, you too can leave a voicemail at 206-350-1642. That's 206-350-1642. Call now. And the email heather@craftlit.com is having a glitch. I know. You heard it in one of our voicemails. That's because the craftlit.com site has been updated and moved to a better hosting platform. What does that mean for you? It means that we're still setting things up. So if you find a glitch that you're thinking is definitely a glitch and shouldn't be working that way, please go to bit.ly, that's bit.ly/craftlit-glitch, all lowercase. This will be in the show notes too. bit.ly/craftlit-glitch, the whole shebang is lowercase. It lets you upload a screenshot of the glitch. If you have a screenshot, it gives you a paragraph of space to type and tell us what's going on. If there are URLs that you can provide, please do. That makes it so much easier and faster for us to locate the issue. So, I think that's all the new business. No, it's not. Because now that we've been almost a year in this space of physical distance and trying to find ways to be not socially distant, here we are with people who have invented really cool kind of open source platforms that people can play in collaboratively. As a consequence, there are 2 sites that I have stumbled upon. One is called playingcards.io, playing cards all one word. The other is jigsawpuzzle.io. It's the most extraordinary thing. This is what people do when they have too much time on their hand. They come up with things that other people can enjoy too, which just makes me happy, you know. These sites are free. They are populated with other human beings. Jigsaw puzzle can be done collaboratively just by random people. There's a chat feature. So you can join in on a puzzle that is being done collaboratively. You can create your own. You can do a puzzle solo. You can invite specific people. There are all sorts of options. Playingcards.io is more of a rabbit hole that you can go down because there is a subreddit. If you haven't experienced a subreddit before, they're kind of fun. There is a subreddit on playingcards.io. And on that subreddit, people have uploaded into a library different card decks and different boards. And I'm using air quotes around them because obviously they're not uploading actual card decks. They're uploading digital files of organized information that will appear within the playingcards.io platform like cards. You can download the old school Clue game board. You upload it into your playingcards.io channel, give it a name, and now you have a board game that you can play online at the same time with people who you choose. The one thing that neither of these places handle, neither playingcards.io or jigsawpuzzle.io, is they don't do audio. Jigsaw Puzzle does a chat feature, a typed in chat feature, which works just fine. Instead, the expectation is that you will be on Zoom or Skype or some kind of voice thing. It could be a regular phone, doesn't matter, just so you can talk to somebody by voice. And you both log into the URL for the game. And so you can see other people's mouses on the screen, moving cards around or moving pieces around. You can also see your mouse on the screen, moving your stuff around. And it's worked. We've played, well, honestly, we've played a family version of Cards Against Humanity with my whole family. And it's fun. Holy smoke. I think we're going to play Clue next. It's great. So, yay, people with too much time on your hands. Thank you so much for designing these sites. They are lovely fun. And I hope you find some fun on them too. Links will be in the show notes for you. And last but not least, before we get to Northanger Abbey, Bridgerton. If you haven't watched Bridgerton on Netflix, what have you been doing with your life? It came out, Christmas Day? It came out around Christmas. Fascinating Shonda Rhimes Shondaland production. There are parts of it that I absolutely loved. There were episodes where I thought, wow, really? I wonder if it was like that in the book. I have no answer yet. I haven't read the books yet or listened to them, but it is absolutely intriguing. It is like eye candy. You cannot stop watching the pretty, pretty people doing pretty, pretty dances, written by a modern woman who apparently is my age. And I know some of you have read the books, so I will let you tune in and let us know your reviews of how they did. I know that a second season is coming, so Bridgerton will not be leaving us for long. The two main stars of the show, I have recently watched interviews with them on YouTube. You can look them up and see. There's one particular interview from KTLA in Los Angeles where I have never seen a middle-aged guy fangirl quite so much about meeting virtually two actors. It's really adorable. And in fact, his co-host afterwards says, I have never seen you turn into a teenage girl like that before. So the show has inspired some people to effusiveness with which they may not have been previously intimate. It was fun. And of course, if you are in the mood on YouTube, you can also find all sorts of fashion experts who will tell you just exactly how appallingly wrong the men's costumes are in particular. This is true. There is no question. It will take it will take about 2 minutes before you see somebody and go, uh-uh. No, 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 no. No, sweetheart, let me tell you. That's true. And yet, because it really doesn't make any claims to be historically accurate, and I'm using air quotes for accurate, it kind of doesn't matter. They look the part enough. It's a fantasy. Sometimes they say things in a way that just makes you go, oh, no. See, because Austin would never have said that. Fine. Let it roll off you. Just keep going. The author also, I saw her interviewed on YouTube as well. She was interviewed for a morning show, and she was asked an interesting question about the intimacy. This is definitely made for adults, people. There are scenes of intimacy that are not something that you could show on regular television in the States. Evidently, adult entertainment websites have been contacting the makers of the show for the rights to some of those clips from the more intimate moments on the show. And it's caused, as you might imagine, some conversation to happen on the internet. I thought the comment by the woman who wrote the books, who is apparently my age, I thought her comment was spectacular. And she said, it's funny. I don't think that there is that big a difference between the scenes of intimacy in our show and any other show in which two people wind up with their clothes off. She said, I think the difference is these scenes of intimacy come far more from a female point of view than from a male point of view. And apparently, that makes them hotter. When you actually pay attention and care about the woman having a good time as well, funny that there is a paradigm shift. And as soon as she said it, I thought, holy smoke, I think she's right. So if your whistle hadn't been wet yet, maybe now it is. Let me know what you think. Again, you can call in 206-350-1642 and let me know. And now, Northanger Abbey. Northanger Abbey. Here we are back at Austin. You knew it would happen. You knew we would come back to Austin. Our first love with Pride and Prejudice almost 15 years ago. It's been so many years, and yet it feels like a blink. And yet, how many places have I lived in between 2006 and now? It's amazing. Jane Austen. We've talked about Jane Austen so often, and for so many of her books so far, really, when you think about it over time. Pride and Prejudice, Persuasion, Sense and Sensibility, and now Northanger Abbey, read by our fabulous listener and often reader, Maya Daguerre, who also owns the voice that gave us Sense and Sensibility. Northanger Abbey is different. Northanger Abbey is different for many reasons, and it is often the book that lovers of Jane Austen say, yeah, I didn't really dig it. And you know me, I take that like a bull to a red cape as my sign that it's my time to rush in. Because here's the thing that I think will make you, if you didn't know this already, will make you sit there, even if you thought you didn't want to do this book, sit there and go, all right, well, it's worth a try. This is the first book, complete story, novel-sized story that Jane Austen wrote. She started writing it when she was 17. It is the last book of hers that was published. It was published in a 4-volume, 2-book set, so 2 volumes per book. It came first in that set. Persuasion was the last one. So first book written, last book published. Was it tinkered with in between? Absolutely. And we know this because there are certain elements that had to have been updated. And when we come across them, I will point them out. Is it a staggering work of Austenian, heartbreaking beauty? It's a tricky question. How much do you love parody? And how much do you love some social satire? And how much do you love either of those when they are not aimed to hurt anyone? There are family jokes that are lodged in this book, one of them within the first paragraph. And I am certain that there are people who she knew layered into the characters in this book. I think that's something that writers can't help but do to some extent, just in general. If they're going to create real people, it's going to wind up being either a person they knew or a composite of a person they knew. And that makes perfect sense. But Jane Austen isn't mean with this humor, or at least she isn't mean to us or her readers or the people who love the kinds of books that she is parodying. And that's a line that is so hard to toe because she is parodying Gothic novels. She was born in the late 1700s, wrote into the early 1800s. So you have someone who grew up reading basically Gothic romances, and these are extraordinarily melodramatic. That's why I gave you guys the links, which I know failed for some people on the app last time. It's because there was YouTube broke the RSS feed. So that has been fixed. You should be able to catch the links to the 2 YouTube videos that I mentioned before. The one was by a professor talking rather seriously about the book The Mysteries of Udolpho, and then a book review by a lovely young goth lady who had read several of these Gothic romances. She's kind of who Jane Austen was writing Northanger Abbey for, as well as who Jane Austen is in some parts of this book parodying, which makes it kind of fun because the people she was writing the book for are still here, extant, a couple hundred years later. It's cool. However, because these Gothic romances, just like modern romances, were so formulaic and had very specific touch points that were expected, young, innocent women, usually quite adept at being a young, beautiful woman, accomplished in music and art and languages and, the list goes on. And of course, always looks perfect. Her dresses are never wrinkled, all of that stuff. You have that part of the story. You also have a mysterious, older, paternalistic, in a kind of creepy way, male figure who is after the sweet young thing or manipulating the sweet young thing or in some other way creepily dealing with the sweet young thing. And you have a Gothic setting. And by Gothic, I mean like medieval stone architecture with young Frankenstein style hidden passages behind mobile bookshelves and tapestries and things that are hiding and go creak in the night and mysterious trunks full of old letters that the young heroine pours across to learn the mystery behind the Gothic mansion that she happens to be squirreled away in because of the paternalistic, creepy older guy. These are the kinds of things that were part of the trope. And these are the exact things that Jane Austen is parodying. I'm trying very hard not to say making fun of, because she's not really making fun of them. She is enjoying using them and tweaking them and making us think twice about them. But it all so clearly comes from a place of love. The thing that she does make fun of, however, are the book reviewers and some of the writers of the other Gothic fiction. Now, you may have said to yourself, how could Jane Austen have written this book when she was so young and then have it take her until she was gone to have the book published? And I would say to yourself, that's a very good question. It happened because she sold the book for £10 to a publisher who then sat upon it for like 10 years more then. It was appalling. She tried to get it back. And of course, she's writing as a young gentleman because same as Acton Bell and Currer Bell and Ellis Bell, the Bronte sisters, women didn't often write under their own name. Some of the Gothic novelists did. The one in question, The Mysteries of Udolpho's author, Anne Radcliffe, she did. But usually for any women who were writing who wanted to be taken at all seriously, they were going under anonymous or some kind of a pseudonymous name. So Jane Austen did try and get the rights back to her book, failed. And of course, she's not living in London. She can't go into London and give this guy what for. So it was left to her brother Henry and her sister Cassandra to reclaim the work. Now, the beautiful part of the story, and the part that, knowing how snarky Jane Austen could be, I totally believe this part of the story. And even if it's apocryphal, I don't care. It's just too beautiful. The story goes that Henry went in to the bookseller, the publisher in London, requested the copyright back, handed over £10 to get it back. Once the manuscript was placed in his hands, he said, "Oh, and by the way, jerk, you just lost the last Jane Austen novel." Turned and left the store, to the gaping astonishment and horror of the jerk who had just sat there on her book, on her manuscript for all this time. Now, his first name is Richard, and that actually is going to matter in a moment. His name was Richard Crosby, and it was just an unlucky first name for him. You will see why as soon as we start the book. Okay, I've been using the word parody a lot, and I want to make sure that we have clear in our heads the difference between parody and satire, because they get blurred a little bit in this book, as they often do. The Daily Show sometimes parodies the news or newscasters or newscast tropes, but the Daily Show also provides satire, which is exposing or criticizing people's stupidity or their vices. So you're using humor specifically to point a finger at weaknesses, foibles, bad things that people have done. With parody, you are exaggerating a form or a style, and you are doing it on purpose to be funny. Some parodies can get pretty harsh. This one, not so much. This one is much more gentle than that. And the reason I think why it is so important to recognize that is because of what was going on with the other female, especially female authors and book reviewers who were male at the time. I don't know if the female authors were actually self-hating female authors, or if they said these things specifically because they thought they should, in order to continue to be taken seriously by the book reviewers. But along with the Gothic novel being a really, really popular kind of book, Anne Radcliffe sold a ton of books. The other thing that they did more than once, and more than a couple of them did this, in writing, they would talk down to, critique their readers and other writers of their kind of fiction. Oh, we're all just those little scribblers. We don't actually know what we're doing, we women writers. Or perhaps even worse, we readers of these books really shouldn't read so many of them. It couldn't possibly be good for our brains, but we're only women. So I have simplified their statements, but this was the upshot of a lot of these commentaries. Sometimes these commentaries came from within the novels themselves, where the young heroine would be a lover of Gothic romance or romance in general. And someone in the book would say, basically, you're going to turn your head to mush if you keep reading that garbage. It's a little disingenuous for an author who is making a living off of writing books like that to be criticizing their readers inside the book. It just seems kind of tacky to me. Jane Austen picks up on that, and throughout the course of this book turns it on its ear. So you will hear things where you're like, well, that kind of sounds like what Heather said the other authors were doing. Listen closely when you hear that. She's too good a writer to have fallen into that pit. Just like she is too good a writer to have written a truly insipid main character. You will think at the beginning, wow, this chick's so not Elizabeth Bennet, or Marianne, or Eleanor, or Jane. Jane Austen could never have been this person, except in some ways. So in many ways, Northanger Abbey, while being truly charming and a fun parody, it really is all about challenging our expectations, challenging our preconceived notions about that kind of book, challenging our stereotypes, which Tenant of Wildfell Hall did in a different way about women. And I actually think, Lise, your comments, and Jenna Lee, your comments as well, really pointed some of that out for us again and underlined it, that Helen in Tenant of Wildfell Hall really is an extraordinary heroine for a book written in 1840. And I posit that in her own quiet way, young Catherine Morland in Northanger Abbey is also a really extraordinary and quite unique heroine, just like Elizabeth Bennet is. The difference is that the Mr. Darcys that show up, or Mr. Darcy, singular, who shows up in Northanger Abbey, is absolutely not the Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, and couldn't be up against Catherine Morland. He would have mowed her down in a heartbeat. Catherine Morland, the heroine of our book, is 17. She is the youngest Austen heroine in any of her books. She is also remarkably physically active. In fact, there are some things about her that remind me of Anne of Green Gables. She lives in her imagination. She is very active. She doesn't always do exactly what she's supposed to do, but she wants to do well. She wants to be good. She wants to fit in. She also wants to have adventures. And that seemed to me like an earlier version of Anne, which only occurred to me last night, and I was kind of surprised when I wrote it down and thought, actually, I think it's kind of true. She plays cricket. This book also had the unique position in the OED until recently of being the first known printed appearance of the word baseball, which is sometimes in England, a version of it is called rounders, because you're rounding the bases. It was being played back in late 1700s. Turns out that there is actually an earlier reference from 1740. So Northanger Abbey is no longer cited in the OED as the origin, the printed origin of the word baseball. It's already out there. Gosh darn it. Austen had that marker next to her name, and now it's gone. But you still will hear it in this first chapter. Some other things that are curious in the first chapter. As often happens, the family into which our heroine is born has some parallels to Jane Austen's family. The father is a clergyman, and instead of having one poor parish, he actually has two parishes, which means he was able to hire someone to help him out, which means he has two incomes. So he has two livings, which makes their life a little bit easier. Her mother is not Mrs. Bennet. Her mother is not a silly woman at all, and it seems to be quite a lovely mother, which, of course, puts our young heroine behind the eight ball if she is going to be the heroine in a Gothic novel. This is the entire first chapter, pointing out all the ways that we are not being set up for a good Gothic romance. The whole first chapter gets us all in on the joke quite completely and beautifully. Austen's voice breaks into this narrative more forcefully and more pointedly throughout this book. Sometimes Austen's commentaries, side commentaries, would sneak in Pride and Prejudice or Sense and Sensibility or Persuasion. Here, it is not sneaky. It is almost like Julie Andrews' voice in Bridgerton. Jane inserts herself in a very meta way throughout this book, letting you know what she thinks and talking to dear reader and things like that. So she is quite definitely telling us what we need to know about her heroine for this book, all through the first chapter. The inside joke that I mentioned from the first paragraph is the name Richard. Her family made jokes about Richard. This stretched back to something she wrote when I think she was 14 or 15. She wrote a fake history of England. You will hear in a later chapter Catherine Morland comment about how difficult she found history books for pleasure reading. And she makes very specific fun of them, which was quite accurate. Jane, in her own life, had written, and it is extant. You can find it. I listened to the first, hour of it on Hoopla, our library audiobook app. And it's quite funny. It's quite funny. But you do have to know a little bit about the history in order to understand all the funny. So Richard, King of England name, was kind of disparaged among her family, blaming some of the Richards having not been such great kings on the fact that they were named Richard. So when it turns out that the guy who was a jerk and then an idiot who'd sat upon her manuscript for so long, his name was Richard Crosby, it's just kind of delicious that she, before she passed away, has a Richard joke on the first page of this novel. It's just too perfect. Sometimes the universe just dovetails like that so beautifully. Towards the end of the chapter, you are going to hear about how young Catherine read all the kind of books that she was supposed to have read as a proper young lady. And she has kind of a commonplace book, a little journal that she would write quotes in, quotations in. I have many friends who kept books like this throughout their life, multiple versions of them sometimes over the years, where they wrote down quotations from whatever they were reading that they just thought were spectacular. And over in my life, anytime I've known somebody who has done that, it is fascinating to go back and read through their commonplace book, which is another name for it. You learn so much about what intrigued them at the time, what they were thinking about based on the kinds of quotations that they were pulling from the books that they were reading. And you also get kind of a window into the soul of the person who's taking these quotes and copying them down. In the book Northanger Abbey, on the page, when we get to the set of quotes, these clips that Catherine has taken out of essays and books and poetry from Alexander Pope all the way to Shakespeare, and you will recognize some of these. They are famous. You may also notice that there really isn't much of a reason for her to have pulled these quotations. They're not particularly deep and meaningful. One of the ones from Shakespeare's beautiful, but because it's completely out of context, it's just kind of a pretty phrase. The book itself is structured where the lines are completely separated going down the page as though separated out and written in a journal. So when we read those, that's what's happening when you hear all of these quotations. You will also hear a reference to young Catherine playing cricket, and you may think to yourself, how is that possible? She's a girl. And the answer is yes. And women played cricket. Really? Often. All the time. Up until like the mid 1800s, well into the Victorian era, that's when it kind of faded out. But women were playing cricket all the way along. And of course, Regency dresses made this so much easier to go on. The skirts were lighter, petticoats were lighter, undergarments were lighter. The shape of the dress was much more conducive to things like this. It shouldn't be a surprise. And yet it was for me. So it really made me happy to find that out, that no, girls were playing this game all the time. All right, we are going to listen to the first chapter right now. So please enjoy Chapter 1 of Northanger Abbey, read for us by the inimitable Mad Daguerre. Here we go.
Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. Read by Maya Daguerre. Chapter 1. No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy would have supposed her born to be a heroine. Her situation in life, the character of her father and mother, her own person and disposition were all equally against her. Her father was a clergyman, without being neglected or poor, and a very respectable man, though his name was Richard, and he had never been handsome. He had a considerable independence, besides 2 good livings, and was not in the least addicted to locking up his daughters. Her mother was a woman of useful plain sense, with a good temper, and what is more remarkable, with a good constitution. She had 3 sons before Catherine was born, and, instead of dying in bringing the latter into the world, as anyone might expect, she still lived to have 6 children more, to see them growing up around her, and to enjoy excellent health herself. A family of 10 children will always be called a fine family, where there are heads and arms and legs enough for the number. But the Morlands had little other right to the word, for they were in general very plain, and Catherine for many years of her life plain as any. She had a thin, awkward figure, a sallow skin without colour, dark, lank hair, and strong features. So much for her person, and not less unpropitious for heroism seemed her mind. She was fond of all boys' plays, and greatly preferred cricket, not merely to dolls, but to the more heroic enjoyments of infancy, nursing a dormouse, feeding a canary bird, or watering a rose bush. Indeed, she had no taste for a garden, and if she gathered flowers at all, it was chiefly for the pleasure of mischief, at least so it was conjectured from her always preferring those which she was forbidden to take. Such were her propensities. Her abilities were quite as extraordinary. She never could learn or understand anything before she was taught, and sometimes not even then, for she was often inattentive and occasionally stupid. Her mother was 3 months in teaching her only to repeat the beggar's petition, and after all, her next sister, Sally, could say it better than she did. Not that Catherine was always stupid, by no means. She learnt the fable of the hare and many friends as quickly as any girl in England. Her mother wished her to learn music, and Catherine was sure she should like it, for she was very fond of tinkling the keys of the old forlorn spinet. So at 8 years old she began. She learnt a year, and could not bear it, and Mrs. Morland, who did not insist on her daughter's being accomplished, in spite of incapacity or distaste, allowed her to leave off. The day which dismissed the music master was one of the happiest of Catherine's life. Her taste for drawing was not superior, though whenever she could obtain the outside of a letter from her mother, or seize upon any other odd piece of paper, she did what she could in the way of by drawing houses and trees and hens and chickens, all very much like one another. Writing in accounts she was taught by her father, French by her mother. Her proficiency in either was not remarkable, and she shirked her lessons in both whenever she could. What a strange, unaccountable character! For, with all these symptoms of a profligacy at 10 years old, she had neither a bad heart or a bad temper, was seldom stubborn, scarcely even quarrelsome, and very kind to the little ones, with very few interruptions of tyranny. She was, moreover, noisy and wild, hated confinement and cleanliness, and loved nothing so well in the world as rolling down the green slope at the back of the house. Such was Catherine Morland at 10. At 15, appearances were mending. She began to curl her hair and long for balls. Her complexion improved. Her features were softened by plumpness and colour. Her eyes gained more animation, and her figure more consequence. Her love of dirt gave way to an inclination for finery, and she grew clean as she grew smart. She now had the pleasure of sometimes hearing her father and mother remark on her personal improvement. "Catherine grows quite a good-looking girl. She's almost pretty today," were words which caught her ears now and then, and how welcome were the sounds. To look almost pretty is an acquisition of higher delight to a girl who has been looking plain the first 15 years of her life than the beauty from the cradle can ever receive. Mrs. Morland was a very good woman, and wished to see her children everything they ought to be, but her time was so much occupied in lying in and teaching the little ones that her elder daughters were inevitably left to shift for themselves, and it was not very wonderful that Catherine, who had by nature nothing heroic about her, should prefer cricket, baseball, riding on horseback, and running about the country at the age of 14 to books, or at least books of information. For provided that nothing like useful knowledge could be gained from them, provided they were all story and no reflection, she never had any objection to books at all. But from 15 to 17 she was in training for a heroine. She read all such works as heroines must read to supply their memories with those quotations which are so serviceable and so soothing in the vicissitudes of their eventful lives. From Pope she learnt to censure those who bear about the mockery of woe. From Gray that many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air. From Thomas that it is a delightful task to teach the young idea how to shoot. And from Shakespeare she gained a great store of information, amongst the rest that trifles light as air are to the jealous confirmation strong as proofs of holy writ, that the poor beetle that we tread upon in corporal sufferance finds a pang as great as when a giant dies, and that a young woman in love always looks like patience on a monument, smiling at grief. So far, her improvement was sufficient, and in many other points she came on exceedingly well, for though she could not write sonnets, she brought herself to read them, and though there seemed no chance of her throwing a whole party into raptures by a prelude on the pianoforte of her own composition, she could listen to other people's performance with very little fatigue. Her greatest deficiency was in the pencil. She had no notion of drawing, not even enough to attempt a sketch of her lover's profile that she might be detected in the design. There she felt miserably short of the true heroic height. At present she did not know her own poverty, for she had no lover to portray. She had reached the age of 17 without having seen one amiable youth who could call forth her sensibility, without having inspired one real passion, and without having excited even any admiration but what was very moderate and very transient. This was strange indeed, but strange things may be generally accounted for if their cause be fairly searched out. There was not one lord in the neighbourhood, no, not even a baronet. There was not one family among their acquaintance who had reared and supported a boy accidentally found at their door, not one young man whose origin was unknown. Her father had no ward, and the squire of the parish no children. But when a young lady is to be a heroine, the perverseness of 40 surrounding families cannot prevent her. Something must and will happen to throw a hero in her way. Mr. Allen, who owned the chief of the property about Fullerton, the village in Wiltshire where the Morlands lived, was ordered to Bath for the benefit of a gouty constitution, and his lady, a good-humoured woman, fond of Miss Morland, and probably aware that if adventures will not befall a young lady in her own village, she must seek them abroad, invited her to go with them. Mr. and Mrs. Morland were all compliance, and Catherine all happiness.
By now, we should absolutely understand and expect that Catherine Morland will not, cannot be the heroine of a Gothic novel, which is fine because this turns out not to be a Gothic novel. It's a great novel, and it's funny, and it's a parody in some places of the Gothic novel trope. But Catherine is definitely not a Gothic novel heroine. She is herself, and she's unique. Her mother is great. Her dad is great. We will not see them again until the end of the book because Mr. and Mrs. Allen have appeared. These are the wealthy neighbors, sans children, who've decided to take young Catherine, because she's such a lovely, sweet girl, with them to Bath, the resort town in southwestern England. This is, of course, the first thing that must happen to the young heroine. You have this inciting incident, this turn, where from this moment things will never be the same for her. So even though it's not a Gothic novel, no, and she's not a Gothic novel heroine, oh, look, here she is getting taken to someplace kind of exotic for her. Mrs. Allen will turn out to be your new favorite Mrs. Bennet. She is silly. She is ridiculous. But she's quite kind. She is also, in some ways, deeply negligent. But it all comes from a good place. And of course, she isn't a mother, so she doesn't really have a clue about some of the things that Catherine hints at to her later on in the book. But she is one of my favorite characters in this. Some of you may know already, some of you may have seen already. There is a film version of Northanger Abbey. It is starring Felicity Jones, who you saw in Rogue One, the Star Wars movie. She is lovely. And I have to say, it is now ranked second in my mind for faithful adaptations. The things that they changed, they had to change. The tweaks that they made, I think, were wise tweaks to make. The characters are absolutely true to the tone of the book, and it's really good. So if you want to know what's coming, definitely watch the film. It's so, how often do I get to say this to you? It's so worth it. I showed it to all the men who I live with, and they have all agreed it is one of their favorite movies and definitely one of their favorite stories because the humor is so gentle, but the characters, Jane Austen's just too good a writer. They're interesting characters. So there you go. If you need something else to watch, something that's gentle, kind, funny, smart, and you don't mind blowing the ending to find out what happens at the end, if you haven't read this before, please feel free. I give you my stamp of approval, because you know that matters so much. You get my stamp of approval to go and watch Northanger Abbey, the movie with Felicity Jones. She is lovely. She is quite young. She's quite young. And you will also probably recognize the gentleman who played Sir Davos in Game of Thrones, if you would watch that. He is his lovely gruffness. So that's fun too. All right, I've yammered enough. You have gotten enough background information for us to get going with this book. I hope you enjoy it. I certainly have had a true kick reading about it, learning about it, and of course, being able to share it with you. Take care of yourself. I'll talk to you soon. Be well. Wear a mask. Bye. If you like what you hear on Craftlit, please review us on iTunes, like us on Facebook, join in the fun in our Facebook group, which is Craftlit Annotated Audiobooks. Always the nicest group of people you're going to find on Facebook, and the place where you can come to and say, nobody else was going to understand this, but I knew you all would. And of course, thank you for your support of Craftlit. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.